Ah yes, zombies. When you think of the films about flesh-eating ghouls of The Walking Dead, what comes to mind first? The fast-paced runners of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead? The knee-slapping hijinks of Shaun of the Dead? Or maybe something a little more recent, like Train to Busan? For me, I get transported back in time to a family friend's living room. While the parents were having drinks and carrying on, my dad saw how bored I was. From there, he proceeded to turn on Night of the Living Dead, the original, the classic. I've talked about the times when I would have to sneak late at night to feast my eyes on the gruesome world of horror, but for this specific genre, my introduction was quite the opposite. In a way, during that brief time, it's almost as if the grandfather of zombies himself babysat me. Now, at that time in my life, I would typically skip a movie if it was in black and white. However, when Johnny uttered the famous line,
"They're coming to get you, Barbara,"
I was hooked and my world opened up just enough for the dead to walk the earth. While the genre has become oversaturated these days, you just didn't see that many Z words running amok on our screens.
Z word, don't say it. Why not? Because it's ridiculous.
But in the 80s, two essential yet vastly different zombie films were released that changed the game. So buckle up as we take a bite into these zombie movies of 1985. A wild ride of fear, partying, and some seriously excellent social commentary in Day of the Dead and The Return of the Living Dead in our 80s horror memories. First up to bat is the heavy hitter, George A. Romero. Where the hell would we be without the maestro of the modern zombie movement? Night of the Living Dead could have easily just been another chiller feature to act as white noise during a makeout session at the drive-in. But what Romero did was have his viewers look inward at how society was at the time. Sorry babe, put that top back on. These brain eaters just made me realize how shitty we are as a population. He continued the trend with arguably one of the greatest sequels ever made with Dawn of the Dead in 1978.
The Dawn of the Dead trailer, I'll never forget because the film was unrated, so they wouldn't play the trailer before 11 o'clock at night because it was almost considered pornographic. So if you wanted to see the trailer for Dawn of the Dead, you'd have to wait till 11 o'clock at night and hope that they would play the trailer. Now, being in Pittsburgh, I was fine with it because it was shot there, so they played a lot of trailers.
When my dad showed me this film, I was already obsessed with the genre, but this one in particular only elevated it. So much so that I was taken to Monroeville, Pennsylvania to walk around the actual mall. Unfortunately though, there was no cheeseball elevator music to act as my soundtrack. No, this was the 90s, so it was most likely something even more cheesy, like Creed. No offense, Scott Stapp fans out there. I know there's one of you. Where Night showed us the disordered times of the 60s, Dawn showed us how selfish and self-absorbed we as a society can be with consumerism. However, as the helicopter sets off away from the mall at the end, it gives the feeling of an uncertainty towards a hopeful future. Then we find out what the future is with the capper of his Dead trilogy. And my friends, it is looking grim. I have to admit, it took me a little longer to finally get around to watching this one. As with taste buds, my hunger for the Living Dead started to taste a little stale. But in the early 2000s, a brand new band came onto the scene with their debut album, Gorillaz. One track on that album, M1A1, stood out amongst the rest of the songs for its intense yet killer sampling from a film that I wasn't familiar with. Forget the rest of the song. Those minute and 40 seconds of pulsating bass lines with a man crying out as if he were on an episode of Seinfeld were played repeatedly. When I look in the liner notes, I found exactly where that sample came from, and I absolutely had to watch this film.
Day of the Dead is
I think of the first three Romero zombie movies, this is actually my favorite. I think I love the John Harrison score. I love just the sort of doomed vibe of it. You know, the scene, I think it was Terry Alexander, just says, "You're never going to figure it out. You're never going to know." And there's something, that resignation to, you know, you're trying to solve a mystery that nobody cares about, and there's nobody to care.
Day of the Dead was more than just a continuation of Romero's Dead series. It was a visceral exploration of a world teetering on the edge of oblivion. Gone was the hope for a cure and a return to somewhat normalcy. Right from the jump, after a very effective nightmare sequence, we see a city in shambles with the only remaining humans crying out for the living. The dead, and a random alligator, have taken over, and the human race is on the brink of extinction. With most of the film taking place in an underground bunker, it eliminates all the fun sequences that we had in the previous entry. Instead, it gives us a feeling of panic, hopelessness, and claustrophobia. There are no fun trips to the stores and no sliding down escalators or lighthearted camaraderie. No, this group of survivors is in their last-ditch effort to stay alive, while trying to find ways to cure this zombie outbreak, all the while turning on each other and not caring of just about anything. That's not to say that none of the characters are fun though. Yes, they are truly terrible people, but hot damn they are fun to watch. Take the main villain of the movie, Captain Rhodes. This recently appointed leader of the group, you know, after the death of their last one, is the biggest tool bag of all time. A grade A asshole with a massive power trip.
I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein, and I want to know what the fuck you're doing with my time!
Ready to kill anyone who crosses the line.
You better know I mean it too, people.
But oh god, why is he so damn enjoyable? Certainly not his character purse, but the way actor Joseph Pilato portrayed him. I mean, the way he hams it up in every scene he's in, he absolutely owns it. Even though we know how it will end for the bad guys in the 80s, there was joy in watching movies like this where a villain is so despicable that you just know he's going to pay big time.
You are gonna pay. Ooh, are you gonna pay?
I know I'm starting to sound like my old man, but they just don't make villains like they used to. This brings me to the film's hero, Sarah Bowman, played by Laurie Cardille. The scientist desperately seeking a cure who embodies resilience and a quest for hope amidst the darkness to Rhodes' unraveling of authority. In any other major studio release, this type of role would go to someone like Kurt Russell, a total take charge and no questions asked badass. Also a male. This type of character is seen in almost every 80s action movie, yet she's severely underappreciated. Hell, in an alternate universe, I could even see this character and Jack Burton teaming up against some other supernatural threat. Your move, Carpenter.
And a man would have to be some kind of fool to think we're all alone in this universe.
Now, enough about these humans. How about the stars of the show? The two previous films indeed had a smaller budget, and while the zombies looked all fine and dandy in their blue and green makeup, their look in Day of the Dead appeared decayed and gruesome, the way we think about how modern zombies should look. This is all thanks to the works of Tom Savini and his pal Greg Nicotero, and a larger budget, of course. The true standout performance is that of Bub, a test subject from scientist Dr. Logan.
I think I, probably told the story before, but my son Devin, since he was born, I have called him Bub, and it has always been after Bub the zombie from Day of the Dead. And I remember showing that movie to him when he was, in his 12, 13, 14, something like that, and telling him that this is why I call you Bub. I still call him Bub to this day. And him loving it, him loving the whole zombie genre, and embracing that zombie madness.
Logan believes through training and conditioning, the zombies can be domesticated. Eventually, we see the human emotions come from Bub, brought out through a powerful performance by Howard Sherman. The moment he raises a gun to shoot Rhodes remains one of my favorite images in all of horror. And the pain he feels when he sees Dr. Frankenstein dead, that's just great stuff, man. Romero continued his Dead legacy in the aughts, and they were fine for the most part. But dude, that original trilogy is truly something special. Day of the Dead may be considered one of the weaker entries of the three, but for me, it doesn't get any better.
You know, that has a great sort of end of that cycle, and you know, and the ending of them on the beach. I don't know, with the helicopter there's something so hopeful about it for a franchise that it usually ends with nothing but doom.
Now let's change that dial to see what's happening on the other side of the coin.
The Return of the Living Dead.
Return of the Living Dead, send more cops. Who doesn't love that, right?
When I said my pops introduced me to zombies, one was certainly not in that conversation. This was one of those having to stay up late at night while the parents were asleep flicks. But I'm a night owl. Always have been for as long as I can remember. So staying up late watching a little premium cable was pretty much the norm on the weekends. Before I was able to rent whatever the hell I wanted, HBO and Cinemax were responsible for warping my fragile little mind by introducing me to blood, boobs, and foul language. I mean, do any of you kiddos out there remember staying up late to watch the premiere of Pamela Anderson's Naked Souls? Don't lie. However, on the horror side of things, one movie in particular stood out: The Return of the Living Dead, the partiest of all zombie movies.
Return of the Living Dead was another one that I got on video because I was in high school and it was a pretty busy time, but I could always go to the video store and walk out with a big old stack of movies. The thing I loved about Return of the Living Dead is it was so fucking weird. It was just so out there and just more brains. It took all the zombie movie tropes that Romero had been sort of swimming in since 1968, was it? I think it was 68. Yeah, since 68, and turned them on their head.
Unlike the somber seriousness of Day of the Dead, writer-director Dan O'Bannon went for a full-on punk rock attitude. The undead weren't just mindless eaters, they were cracking jokes, and their soundtrack was straight from the punk scene. I'm talking The Damned, TSOL, The Cramps, The Flesh Eaters. For the young skater in me, this was all I could ever want in a horror flick. It was rebellious, in your face, and a middle finger to the conventional norms of the genre.
One of the best things about Return of the Living Dead is its sheer audacity. I love that the beginning, sets out that this story is true. and right then, tonally the movie that you're seeing.
And understandably, when I was a youngster, seeing the title The Return of the Living Dead had me believe that I would be watching the sequel to the Romero original, and in color no less. As it turns out, there is a big what-if factor that comes into play here. After releasing Night of the Living Dead, Romero and co-scribe John Russo parted ways, agreeing that Russo could continue using Living Dead in future titles. This led to Russo eventually releasing the sequel novel, The Return of the Living Dead. A film adaptation was eventually given a go, even with Tobe Hooper at the helm, but it failed to materialize, and Hooper went on to make the very bonkers Life Force. At the same time, Dark Star and Alien screenwriter Dan O'Bannon was brought in to give the script a complete overhaul, removing anything tied directly to Romero's work. Well, except that it implies the black and white classic not only exists, but is also based on actual events.
Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
As an almost act of rebellion, it took the rules established in that film and threw them away in the trash. These weren't your grandpa's undead. They were fast, spoke, and were pretty much unkillable, which makes The Return of the Living Dead a wild and unpredictable watch. As far as the humans go, the group of punks in this film come off as cliched caricatures, but I wanted to be hanging out with them. I'd take Spider, Trash, Casey, Chuck, Scuzz, and Suicide's side over any group in Shermer, Illinois any day of the week. Those are my people. Hell, I was in that group in high school, riding in cars while blasting metal and punk and occasionally frequenting a local cemetery or two.
Do you ever fantasize about being killed?
Unfortunately, no one in my group of friends did a random striptease on top of a tombstone, and they definitely didn't look like Linnea Quigley. And speaking of trash, if I had anything to blame on watching these types of films at a young age, it would be how I'm about 95% sure that Linnea Quigley set me on the fast track to early puberty. Thank you. For the non-punks, we have Clu Gulager as Bert, Weekend at Bernie's Don Calfa as his pal Ernie, and Poltergeist James Karen as Frank. Even if these folks may have questioned why they decided to jump aboard a film as wild as this, it's pretty awesome to see these veteran actors take a chance to hang out in our playground.
And it's, Clue's performance in that film is so much fun. Don Calfa, all those guys, it is James Karen, it is tonally such a good time. Yet tragic, and again, but it is a great era to Night of the Living Dead, and it knows how to have a good time. It knows how to be fun.
They all bring their A game here to make their characters work with believability.
And the makeup effects were great. It was also very funny. There's a lot of yelling in that movie. I've watched it recently. People yell a lot in that movie, a lot of screaming. But it screams of joy from the audience watching it because it is just so unbelievably out there. Another movie that really effectively blended horror and comedy, but more than anything, expertly directed. It really is very precisely directed. There's no waste. It's all economical. And they took that finite location and really capitalized on all the suspense and tension and horror that you could generate from one location.
Both Day of the Dead and The Return of the Living Dead will always stand the test of time. As with Romero's Dead saga, The Return of the Living Dead also spawned several sequels that never hit the same magic as the first. However, I will always defend the madness of Return of the Living Dead 3. While both are different, their impact can be seen in the modern era. Take a look at The Walking Dead, for example. Who knows if we would even have that show and its 100 spin-offs if it weren't for films like Day of the Dead focusing more on the human race? Or would we still have the zaniness of Shaun of the Dead or Cooties without O'Bannon's splatter piece? One thing these films have in common is the thought of inevitability. No matter what these characters do, the dead keep coming, and there's nothing they can do about it. So, which side of the zombie apocalypse would you want to be on? The one where people try to take over and claim superiority over one another, crushing all hopes of the last surviving strand of humanity that we have left? Or would you rather crank down your window and blast some high-octane tunes while holding your middle finger in the air as you laugh at the chaos that we made?
We hope you enjoyed our dive into the year 1985. Next up, join us as we take you into space, into a lab, and into the horrors of suburbia in the year 1986. Until next time, gore hounds.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
Hi friends, your humble narrator Tyler Nichols here, and I hope that you enjoyed that episode of 80s Horror Memories. If you missed our previous episode, click over here. If you want to see more from our series, click up here. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right here. And most importantly, stay spooky, folks.
George, for a long time, this is the greatest quote he said to me one day. He said, you know, Greg, for a long time, I was the only kid in the sandbox. He was the only guy making zombie movies. And he was a happy kid. And then all of a sudden, video games come along, Resident Evil comes along, House of the Dead comes along, comic books come along, Walking Dead comes along, and he's playing in the sandbox, and there's all these other zombie projects. And he had kind of said to me, because after season 1 of The Walking Dead, we wanted George to come and direct one. And he said, no. He said, your zombies are your zombies. My zombies are my zombies. He said, it's kind of the way it is. And, you know, I mean, I know that George felt a little, you know, weird and betrayed by the fact that this genre that he created sort of took off and became its own thing. You know, and I always say that really, in my opinion, the thing that did that was first-person video games. You know, when you became the character that could shoot zombies with an orange plastic gun, the Sega House of the Dead or Resident Evil, that opened the zombie genre to gamers. Up to that point, that had never happened. So all these people that loved shooting zombies all of a sudden went, wait, this is kind of cool. Corpses come back from the dead, and if they bite you and you turn. And so, you know, I had always really said to George, that was when it changed. When they started making video games out of zombie mythology, then the entire world went, oh, this is cool. And, you know, who would have known with The Walking Dead that would have happened, that would have perpetuated that, because nothing like that had been on TV. When we shot Land of the Dead, we were concerned about the ratings. So we would shoot zombies in front of blue screen so that if we had to re-edit something, we didn't want to cut the effect out. We would just have a zombie pass the frame real quickly to obscure it for a split second. And then Walking Dead comes on, and we're doing stuff on TV that he couldn't do in the theater in 2005. That was 5 years later. So the world just changed quickly. But, you know, I just think a lot of that, again, has to do with, you know, sort of people paying homage to that time period, that late 70s, 80s time period where the movies and the effects were so profound and inspirational that it changed people's direction in their life.